Luxury, over-the-top, prestigious, maintenance-hungry, and pure perfection are all words used when describing the L322 Range Rover. It's still one of the most luxurious vehicles on the road today, and even after all of the videos I've done on the L322 Range Rover, I've never done one doing a full overview of what the Range Rover is all about. So let's jump in to what will likely be our most detailed video about the Range Rover yet. But before we do, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications to get notified every time we upload a new video. On top of that, be sure to check out Downforce, which is clothing for automotive enthusiasts as well as posters and bags for your long road trips. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into the video talking about the full overview of the L322. The third generation Range Rover, dubbed L322, was a huge step forward for Land Rover, and it was an even bigger step forward from the P38, which was only in production for a short time compared to the L322 and the Range Rover Classic. That's mainly due to the fact that the P38 was a massive cluster of truly awful quality, and while I love the P38, there's no denying it's not well built. This new Range Rover that came out in 2002 was meant to change that, although it did suffer from some huge growing pains. One of the biggest of those pains, though, was changing ownership into different companies who really weren't ready for the challenge that was bringing Land Rover into the modern age. BMW purchased Rover Group in 1994 and spun off Land Rover into a separate entity, which really was one of the best moves they could have made. Ford then bought Land Rover in 2000 and things began to change. Then finally, in 2008, the maker of the world's cheapest car bought the brand and turned it into Jaguar Land Rover that we know today. When it first came out in 2002, the L322 used a variation of different petrol and diesel engines. The first generation of the L322 had a 4.4 V8 BMW as well as a TD6. In 2006 though, the Range Rover started using the Jaguar 4.4 V8 as well as a TD V8 from Ford. In all honesty, most of the original reliability problems came from the Range Rover's 4.4 BMW V8. These 4.4 V8s from BMW are notorious for braking, and that caused a lot of issues with early L322s. The one behind me is the second facelift that the L322 received, and it has the 5-liter V8 from Jaguar, which is one of the smoothest engines I've ever experienced. They also had a supercharger option as well as a TD V8 version. The only downside to this model though is the 6-speed slushbox transmission that was under the hood. Luckily though, the TD V8 had the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission, which was much smoother and much better at performance. The L322 used a monocoque chassis design, which also has some of the most comfortable air suspension I've ever felt. It also weighs 6,000 pounds, so it's quite the hefty machine. In fact, it is much heavier than the current L405. This thing doesn't really go over a mountain, it more of just kind of flattens it out so other people can go over it as well. Skipping ahead a few years from the early production, we land in the 2010 facelift, the L322's second facelift since its launch in 2002. At this point, the Range Rover now has a more sophisticated design, terrain response, which was added a few years earlier, and a new infotainment system and a much more modern look. We also saw one of the first TFT LCD displays used for an instrument cluster, which made the L322 stand out from the rest of the luxury vehicles on the market. Moving forward another year, the 2011 model saw additional minor style changes and a slightly improved interior with new optional extras. This is where we also started to see the astonishing Autobiography Black Edition, which I would give my firstborn up for. But now let's experience what the Range Rover is all about, the inside. This specific L322 has quite a list of options selected, including this wood steering wheel option, which was $1,000 at the time of purchase. On top of that, we also have the jet black interior, which was another optional extra at the time. With the jet black interior, you obviously got the black leather, but you also got a black piano style wood. This is personally my favorite color combination for the L322. If I had to have my second choice, it would be white leather with black piping and black wood like this, but overall, the jet black interior is still my favorite. This L322 also had the optional luxury package selected, which gave you 20-inch alloy wheels, a heated steering wheel, cooled front seats, 14-way power adjustable seats, as well as Oxford leather. With that, you also had auto-dimming exterior mirrors, as well as some extra leather placed throughout the car. But there are a few options not selected on this model, which include the additional exterior cameras. This L322 only has the backup camera, which is fine because it's never really off-road anyway. On top of that, it doesn't have the DVD player with the screens in the headrest or the cooled compartment for storing drinks and snacks. Those, however, are features I would like in my next L322. There's also another option this Range Rover isn't spec'd with, and it's one that I'm very happy, and it starts with a big S, and it's called a supercharger. Now, from what I've seen, the supercharged Range Rover is an incredible machine with over 500 horsepower. But the problem comes when you realize that 500 horsepower comes at a very big cost. And I'm not talking about the original MSRP. The problem with the supercharged Range Rover is the superchargers were known to be an expensive problem to fix. So it's actually one that I'm glad to not have. And I've also never felt that the 375 horsepower V8 was sluggish. And one of the ways you can actually tell if a Range Rover L322 is supercharged is from the tailpipes. For example, on the supercharged versions, as you can see here, they have the little chrome pipes sticking out. But on this L322, they're nowhere to be found. The Range Rover L322 was a mismatched cluster of Ford, BMW, and Tata motors. The interior trim ranges from high-quality leathers and woods to cheap BMW and Ford interchangeable pieces. The center trim is lined with a beautiful wood, but on the inner part is a very cheap and awful plastic straight out of the shed in the back. So while the L322 is a luxurious 4x4, don't worry, it's still a proper Range Rover. One of the less great options of the L322 though is the back seats. Now 2010 to 2012 models did have some extra options for the rear seats, including power reclining options, as well as in the Holland and Holland edition, a refrigerator with champagne flutes. However, in the normal L322, it's pretty bare and there's really nothing for the rear passengers. On top of that, I have my seat in my normal seating position for the front driver's seat, and I have just absolutely no legroom whatsoever. This car caught a lot of flack for being one of the biggest SUVs out at the time, but having absolutely no space or comfort for rear passengers. Now, I do have heated seats back here, which is nice, but to be fair, an average-sized adult is going to have a harder time fitting back here for a long trip, unless the driver moves their seat forward and the passenger moves their seat forward, and then nobody's comfortable. So really, rear seats on this car are horrible. The rear passengers in the L322 were really forgotten, and they weren't remembered until the L405. But who cares? This car's all about driving. It's all about the experience of the driver. Who cares about the people in the back? One of my favorite parts of the L322 though is actually one that is missing from the current generation L405 Range Rover. And that's that the L322 always had such a sense of occasion when you were behind the wheel. It is incredibly hard to capture the soul and the essence that this car has, but the L405 just hasn't done it. You sit very high and you feel as if you're commanding the road, and the L405 just doesn't have that. And there's one good reason for that. The L405 was lowered and widened like a sports car. And because of that, the seats had to be lowered in order to accommodate the lower roofline. And due to that, you end up sitting just a little bit further down and you feel a little bit more hunkered down and surrounded by the rest of the car. Whereas in the L322, you feel as if you're surrounding the car. It's very difficult to explain, but overall, the L322 is just more of a special occasion when you're behind the wheel, and the L405 is just a little bit normal. It's such an occasion to drive too, and it's really perfect for anything. If you're looking for a luxury grand tour, the L322 is perfect. And if you're looking for something that you can hop around town in, the Range Rover's got it covered. And best of all, if you're looking for the best 4x4 by far, the L322 is unmatched. I've used the L322 for everything from the morning commute to going to the grocery store, and I've also taken it off-road quite a bit when I first got it. And never once did the L322 let me down. It was perfect in every situation and in every environment. And because of that, I think it's the greatest SUV Land Rover have ever built. But overall, the greatest thing about the L322 Range Rover is how it makes everything seem effortless. Whether you're climbing a mountain or going to the grocery store to get some milk, the L322 makes the entire experience seem pure and effortless. I have never experienced a vehicle that just does everything you want it to do. And on top of that, it just makes everything so simple. This luxury SUV wasn't about SVR badges thrown all over the car and carbon fiber trim bucket racing seats and carbon fiber wood interior. It was about one thing: making the best SUV possible. And it did that in such a way that it inspired the likes of BMW, Audi, Mercedes, and even now Bentley with the L405 and the Bentayga. The L322 was a classic icon because of one simple thing. It had one job, and it did that job better than anything else. All of these car makers have tried for years to match something of the quality of the Range Rover, and none of them have ever come close. There's just something special about the L322 that makes it better than anything else for sale, even still today. And the most impressive part of that, though, is it all came from a company who just a few years before its release didn't expect to be around anymore. Land Rover was bleeding money like crazy, and under BMW and Ford's management, they weren't doing very well at all. So really, I think we're all surprised the L322 made it as long as it did, and that the L405 even came out. But we all have Tata Motors to thank for that one. So before we wrap the video up, let's take the L322 on a quick POV drive. No music, no sound, just pure Range Rover driving bliss.